Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Alice from Peking University. I'm so glad meeting you again at iCANX-Talks this Friday. So iCANX-Talks connects the world and the universe. We invited the top scientists to deliver the latest results and to give the lectures to everyone. Let you know how high tech changes the world. How high tech help you, to get connected with everyone. So this is iCANX-Talks. So this was the seventh time we keep on these topics. We have already, for more than 10 speakers on this stage. And today we are also keep on going. We have two speakers. And before we got to the, the latest results, we want to get you follow us on Twitter and iCANX-Talks. If you miss the previous talks, you can easily to find the video for replay on YouTube to find for iCANX-Talks. If you don't know iCANX-Talks yet, please search on Google for iCANX-Talks. And if you already heard several of our series and you have some ideas, please let us know. We are doing this online survey for iCANX-Talks as every week. So please, scan the code or just type in, go to the website. You will easily find our survey. So providing more suggestions and more comments to help us to get more kind of good surveys on iCANX-Talks. So today is a big day. Because everyone knows that tomorrow in China will be a scientific researchers day. So today we're going to give a celebration. Before that, we're going to get on a big topic because this topic is very widely known and very widely get attraction, more attention on this. It is artificial intelligence. This was hard for several or many years. Everyone was going to know what kind of AI can do for the future. Another hot topic is for the biomedical applications, especially under this special time period. Everyone knows that the whole world was affected by this, viruses. How to deal with it? How to deal with all these kind of different kind of diseases and many different types, the viruses. So for this kind of topics is always attract more attention. So today we combine these two together. We will have artificial intelligence in biomedical applications. So two speakers will focus on this. So we always welcome you to post your questions in the meeting room because we will have this iCANX-Talks dialogue during between these two talks. We want to hear from your questions and your comments and what kind of things you want to know to discuss with our super speakers. So welcome to join us and welcome to, post your questions, your comments, and the meeting room. This is an open platform for everyone. This is, a big discussion place for the latest results. So without further ado, I will go to have my distinguished speakers and my distinguished guest hosters. So today it's Professor He Bin will give a talk, and Professor Tony Huang, the superstar, is going to be our guest hosters. So Tony, please introduce Professor He Bin. Your time.
Alice, thank you very much. So today is my great honor to introduce Professor Bin He. He's trustee professor at Carnegie Mellon University, and he's also head of Department of Biomedical Engineering at Carnegie Mellon University. Professor He is a pioneer and a leader in the field of neuroengineering and biomedical imaging. And because of his significant contribution in these two fields, and he has been recognized with many prestigious awards, such as IEEE William Murdoch Award, IEEE Biomedical Engineering Award, and IEEE BMBA's Career Achievement Awards. Professor He is not only a tremendous, exceptional researcher, but also he's a tremendous leader. I think that aspect is something that all us Chinese Americans need to learn from Professor He. And he's the head of his department. And before that, when he was a professor at University of Minnesota, he was also the director of a big center. and he was the president of IEEE Engineering in Medicine and Biology Society, and he was also chair of the International Academy of Medical and Biological Engineering. He also served as the editor-in-chief of IEEE Transactions of Biomedical Engineering, and under his leadership, he made the journal really profile and also raised its impact factor. So I just want to say that I really respect Professor He tremendously. I think there are a lot of things I can learn from Professor He, and I'm sure that all of you can learn a lot of things from Professor He, and including his talk today. So please join me in welcoming Professor He.
Thank you. Thank you, Tony, for the kind introduction. Thank you, Professor Zhang, for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to join this platform today and to share our research. Let me see. I need to share my screen. Oh, I cannot share my screen. I'm sorry. I was disabled to share the screen. Maybe someone could allow me to share the screen. Here we go. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, once again, good morning and good evening or good afternoon, and whoever you are. It's my great pleasure to introduce the research work that my student and coworkers and myself have been doing in the past several years on two topics. One is brain imaging, another is brain-computer interface. But I put these two together because there is a fundamental connection between these two, is we use something we call EEG or brain wave. So this slide illustrates that is the two topics. On the left side is the dynamic brain imaging. We want to understand our human brain, how it works, and if you are sick, what kind of disease, what's a dysfunction. And on the right-hand side is we do not stop at understanding how brain works, but we want to decode, extract the intention of the human brain, and through a technology called brain-computer interface to control a computer, a device, a robot, or your environment. So these are the two topics I would like to cover today. Now I would like to start with this dynamic brain imaging because this is how I started my research, and this is how I think is one of the important and fundamental aspect. Even if you want to control the environment and a device or computer, first of all, you need to understand better the brain, and so you can decode the brain intention. This slide illustrates that two pictures here. For those who are familiar with functional MRI, this is an important neuroimaging technology developed since 1992. This hotspot illustrates that if a part of your brain is activated at a certain time and at a certain location, using the functional MRI, we can very precisely to find out where this location is. So we need to find out very precise spatial location to mapping the brain activity. But on the other hand, while functional MRI is extremely useful, remain to be the dominating technology in neuroimaging. This chart, the blue curve here, shows the time profile for functional MRI signal at one location. So if you look from here to here, it's about 10 seconds, which illustrates that while functional MRI has very high spatial resolution, its temporal resolution is rather limited. On the other hand, if you look at this purple color, this very tiny and the fluctuation here, this is electrical activity of the brain, or EEG, or brainwave, which provides much higher temporal resolution, but unfortunately, the EEG does not have high enough spatial resolution. So one of the challenge in the brain mapping field is to develop a technology that can give us high spatial and high temporal resolution. And before I'm going to talk about EEG-based dynamic brain imaging, I want to mention that while it's not the focus of my presentation today, the MR-based neuroimaging has been really making tremendous progress in this field. There are many, many technologies, including the regular functional MRI, resting state functional MRI, diffusion MRI, multi-band and MRI. There are many, many. So that's not what I'm going to cover today, because regardless of whatever functional MRI can do, its temporal resolution is relatively limited. Now, this is further illustrated in this chart. The left side is what we talk about. This blue color is functional MRI time course, and this purple color is EEG, or electrophysiological signal. We do a very simple power spectrum analysis, apply FFT on the left side. Then what we're going to see is this blue color, the functional MRI signal, becomes a very narrowly distributed low frequency activity that is distributed less than 0.4 hertz. On the other hand, the EEG signal, which is shown here, you can see here is spread out quite a wide spectrum in the frequency domain. So this generates a very important challenge. The challenge is, while a single brain, we can use EEG to record, we can use functional MRI to record, but these are two signals coming from the same condition, same human subject, they do not overlap even in the frequency domain. So how to really understand and integrate this information, and how we can reconcile this different kind of imaging modality to understand the single human brain. This remains to be one of the grand challenges in the field. Now, how are we going to do that? There are multiple ways to address this challenge. The challenge that my group has been pursuing together with many other research labs in the world is something we call electrophysiological source imaging. And this slide illustrates the general concept of this approach. First of all, let's look at here. We all know there's close to 100 billion neurons in our brain. And each of these neurons can fire. So when I am speaking, when you are listening, and when people are doing whatever action they are doing, there are certain neurons inside our brain are activating. Now, once these neurons are activated, it generates electrons, something called transmembrane current, flowing through the membrane. This is driven by biochemical process. That is actually something you can think about as a battery inside our brain that is driving all the electromagnetic phenomena or activity associated with our brain. Now, in this case, we can see if we look at it in a global scale, you can consider this current density distribution for the excitable medium, and then it flows through the passive volume conductor inside the brain. With that, it will generate electrical potential distribution, which can be measured by the electrode over the scalp, or by coil, which is magnetoencephalography or magnetic field. So if we look at the spatial domain, we can see the EEG distribution, which is shown here at a one-time point. Here is MEG distribution. So either electrical or magnetic distribution according to the neuronal excitation. If we would simplify this entire process, this may be represented by a linear equation. So here phi is electrical signal, B is a magnetic signal, and the K here is a kernel function or the lead field. J is a neural current density, and N is additive noise. So with this very simple linear equation, then essentially what we're having is a linear equation connecting the neural source, which is representing our function, cognition, or even perception, with what's being measured over the scalp. So if we could solve this problem, then we could, from the EEG or MEG recording through various modeling, we could find out how and where these currents are distributed inside the brain. Now, a little bit note further is, now the question is, what exactly we are looking at? Because we're not looking at the neural current of every single neurons out of the 100 billion neurons. What we are looking at is synchronized neuronal activity. There's one notion is the dynamic brain functional imaging using EEG or MEG is not detecting every single neuron's activity. It is rather detecting signals if, for example, these pyramidal cells, and if it's lining up and together, you can see this current dipole and representing the current field. And if you look at a global field, you can see this current density pointing and perpendicular to local curvature of the cortex. And then they generate their biophysical current source located in the three-dimensional volume and which generate the surface EEG. So this is essentially the notion, if the neurons are firing randomly, they will cancel each other. Only those neural population, the network, if they're going to enhance each other, that will be detected, will be imaged by this electrophysiological source imaging. This slide just is a flowchart of a general how this source imaging and concept works. First of all, we talk about starting from electrical or magnetic signal, and you get functional information over the scalp. One important a priori information is by using high resolution structure MRI. So by taking structure MRI, we find anatomical information, we constrain these functional information to solve the source imaging or even connectivity imaging. In this case, you can see starting from the scalp surface, we may get to the brain surface or even inside the brain, or even look at a connectivity and how the network information flow inside the brain. There are a lot of mathematics and machine learning algorithm involved with this approach. And I would not like to talk about these mathematical equations. Here, this slide just illustrates some of them, that you have dipole source, you have a Bayesian framework, you have beamformer, you have nonlinear, and you use this regular minimum norm approach. But if anyone is interested in, and there's the review paper describing these details, so that can be consulted. The next, I would like to show you some example to see how these dynamic brain imaging can do. One application is to in the cognitive brain science. In this particular problem, and there's a phenomenon called binocular rivalry. If you can see this, the green is going to provide to the right eye and the red provide to left eye. The perception of the human subject is to, you either get a green, switch to red, or to green. Now, I have a video to show this process. Let's see how it would work. So the subject, we do not let the eye to look at both colors. There's either you can only see the red or blue or green for each of these eye. But what the subject or human subject feel is they only see red at one time and switching to the blue in the next time. In this way, we use a technology called frequency tagging by giving two different kind of frequency of these red and blue and green signal. And then we record that, we do the functional imaging, you can see that you can find out how the brain, a visual cortex is correspondingly activated corresponding to, and the input that either trigger the perception of red signal or green signal. So this is just one example. Another example is let's look at a more practical or clinical application. There's a major application of this approach is to imaging the epilepsy. Now, let's maybe look at some statistics of the epilepsy. For those students who are not familiar with epilepsy, this chart illustrates if you record the electrical signal, here is a normal. Once you get a seizure, here is you can see a nonlinear chaotic activity inside the brain, which is associated with the seizure. And sometimes the patient is going to lose consciousness. And this costs the United States each year and more than $15 billion in one country alone. And there are 3 million patients in US. There are 8 million patients in China. There are 65 million patients in the world. Now, out of these more 65 million patients, 1/3 of them cannot be controlled by medication. So we need some approach to handle these patients. What in the hospital clinical setting, how this is being done. Here is the patient. First of all, you go to see doctor and do a quick EEG scan, MR scan. If all these does not reveal the information doctor need, you will be sent to their operating room to open the skull and put there some recording electrode to see that directly measures their seizure activity. And finally, doctor formulate a seizure and surgical plan and resect or take out some tissue that's generating the seizure. This entire process is very costly and can be up to $200,000 per patient. And it's a really very costly, painful, and also it's risky because of the invasive surgery and the need. So here is one important application that we are pursuing is try to use non-invasive and EEG-based imaging technology. As what we talk about, we solve this imaging equation and we find out what is source inside, and then we look at the connectivity between these sources, and we tell doctor that where these sources should be resected and and take out this tissue. Now, of course, we want to confirm if this imaging is correct. So we compare with invasive recording and to see that how well our non-invasive imaging result is going to do the job compared with the clinical routine. I want to mention one important work done by Geneva group. And Dr. Broadback and her colleague in University of Geneva has spent 10 years to follow 152 patients. They did virtually everything, including MRI, PET, SPECT, low resolution EEG source imaging, high resolution EEG source imaging. The only thing they didn't do is MEG. But according to their study, except MEG, among all these modalities, the high resolution EEG source imaging provides the highest sensitivity and specificity and in these patients. Now, what do they do? This work is very important, but they use something called interictal spike. And so here is a challenge in this field. The one challenge is we want to treat seizure for epilepsy patients. So how we are going to find out if the interictal spike, this imaging result can really tell us where the seizure is. So that is challenge number one. Challenge number two, we're not going to just find out where the source is, but we want to find out how big that source is. So that is challenge number two. We need to estimate that extent. The challenge number three is not scientific, but it's more clinical. That is, how can we convince our clinical collaborators, the doctors, to put a more electrode to get a higher density EEG recording. So next, I would like to share with you that one of the recent works that we just published 1 month ago and on this work. This work was done in collaboration with the Mayo Clinic, and all the clinical recording was done in Mayo, and then the machine learning algorithm and data analysis was performed in Carnegie Mellon University. Here illustrates the concept of our approach. So we consider the brain network, in this particular case, an abnormal network associated with epilepsy. So we try to, on one, we want to separate, image them in the spatial extent, if they located in different region. And second is we want to separate the time profile, to look at a different kind of, for example, here is the interictal spike. Here is something associated with the seizure oscillation. The third thing, which is a very important and a concept which we developed based on sparse signal processing technology, is we introduce something called edge sparsity. The edge sparsity essentially applied to, in this case, for epileptic source. There is an aerial activity, but the background is non-active. So there's a huge and edge sparsity and between the epileptic tissue versus the normal tissue. So we introduce this, and then we develop the machine learning algorithm to eventually estimate where the epileptic source is located. This slide illustrates the computer simulation result as a benchmark test, because in computer simulation, we can simulate everything. And we tested our extent and estimation. So we generated almost 1,000 and the setting of the using Monte Carlo and the simulation protocol. And here is the actual simulated source extent. Here is estimated source extent. And the machine or algorithm does not know anything except these data come in. So you can see that this algorithm works quite well, although it's not perfect, because once you're adding the noise, and there's always a dispersion. The next, we look at a group of 36 epilepsy patients. We look at interictal spike first, like the previous work. The interictal spike is illustrated here. You can see these are interictal spike, and we apply our approach. Here, just illustrating that this is a non-invasively imaged activity, and this green color shows the surgical resection. So the doctors take out this region in the patient, and the patient became seizure-free. So we compare our non-invasive imaging result with the surgical resection outcome. And here is, you can see again that this in another patient, here again is another patient. In this particular patient, that we have also invasive and intracranial EEG recording. So we're overlapping these two and try to see how well the imaging technology works. And I want to point your attention here about the localization error is it's on average and is about 15 millimeter or so. Okay, this is, or it's shown here. So 15 to 17 millimeter if we use interictal spike. The next phase of what we did is same group of patients. We are not looking at interictal spike, but we developed this machine learning algorithm to look at the seizure directly. And by imaging seizure directly, here is a graphic illustration. Once again, is a non-invasive imaging result overlapping with here is a surgical resection or the invasive recording to show the performance of the non-invasive imaging. And what is interesting is that we found that the localization error reduced dramatically from about 17 millimeter to 6 millimeter here, if we use the seizure data directly. So this represents one of the important and progress in this field, that virtually most activity is people record interictal spikes using EEG or MEG and do source localization. But here, this is statistical result. You can see in all patients, you can see that if you're using interictal spike, here is a result, and the average close to 20 millimeter. But here is using seizure data, you can see that it will average about 6 millimeter. And there is statistically significant difference between these two groups of the data. Now we break down this data further, and there are the patient, we look at two patient group. Patient, this class 1 to 2 means the patient was seizure free and after the surgery. In this case, we found that while seizure imaging is helpful, there's no statistically significant difference. Another group is seizure remain. So even you do the surgery, you did not cure the seizure. In this group, we found that there is a huge difference, and which is statistically significant, that the direct seizure imaging improves accuracy and specificity of localization of seizure source. So here just showing that how these machine learning algorithm can help us to understand the brain, either it's a normal brain or it's abnormal brain. And this video just illustrate and how this technique may work. You can see here is basically temporal evolution of the epilepsy signals. Here is showing that the invasive recording electroposition, and this red color show the clinical finding using invasive recording. These dynamic images show the non-invasive source imaging result and from the seizure recording in a particular patient. And so you can see that the non-invasive imaging and invasive recording are agreeing quite well between each other. So move forward, we are not just want to find out where we want to image, and furthermore, we want to know these network performance. So here there is an approach we are pursuing further. We call electrophysiological connectome, in the sense that we, using the approach we previously described, we get the source image, we get a time course, we perform a functional connectivity on the source signal further. And using this approach, we are trying to understand the information flow and inside the brain. Just as a service to the community and to a lot of the students, this is an open source MATLAB-based toolbox that my lab has developed that we share. If you use search engine iCANX-Talks, you will find out this link. And every source code is open, and this source program, it's a mouse-driven MATLAB script. You can use this for spatial domain, temporal domain, spectral domain analysis, including their ECOG, EEG, MEG, and also including the functional connectivity. And so it's welcome, everyone is welcome to download to use it. And this hopefully is going to help some students to help you visualize your data if you would work on the brain imaging problem. And here is just a very simple example to illustrate the application of this toolbox. In this particular case, we look at the epilepsy patient and we record both EEG and MEG, and we get the region of interest. There's two regions. We're not sure which one should be really the seizure source. So we perform a functional connectivity analysis, and we found that one is a driving force and the other is secondary source. And this driving force was eventually, it was resected and was found that the patient is seizure-free, and which agree well with our functional connectivity analysis. So I think I will switch gear here and from dynamic brain imaging to brain-computer interface. This cartoon illustrates, once again, we showed it before, is a very simple illustration about what a brain-computer interface is if you are not very familiar with yet. So there's a brain, there's a computer. And I want to emphasize that while I would like to introduce some of the development of machine learning approach our group did, I also want to show some neuroscience experiment, which means that we cannot just look at machine learning, but we also need to look at neuroscience in this brain-computer interface research. This is a schematic diagram taken from a chapter of a book, and the third edition of neuroengineering textbook that I edited. This chapter was co-authored with Professor Gao Shangkai in Tsinghua University, Professor Meng Jianjun, my former postdoc in Shanghai Jiao Tong University, and Professor Yuan Han in Oklahoma University, my former PhD student. And in this brain-computer interface chapter, and we explain two concepts. One is so-called the brain control. That is, we can record, decode the brain intention, use that to replace a function, restore function, enhance function, supplement function, or improve a body function. So this is everything is brain driven. But the brain-computer interface could have another direction. That is that we could also take the signal and we can inject physical energy to modulate the brain. And sometimes we also call neuromodulation. And it can be electrical signal, magnetic signal, optical signal, or even acoustic signal, and to modulate the brain to encode and to intervene with the central nervous system. And the following discussion about the brain-computer interface is going to be focused on the brain control, not on the neuromodulation and the aspect. So for this brain control application of brain-computer interface, I want to show you some statistics first. And in United States alone, there are 5.4 million Americans are paralyzed, which include 1.6% of US adult and the population. And that is the people that get injured and spinal cord, or they are paralyzed at whatever level. For a single person, if you get spinal cord injury at age 25, throughout your entire life, it will be $4.7 million per person. And each year in US alone, there are more than $40 billion spent on the spinal cord injury and in just one single and the medical health challenge. So here's the BCI application. Let's look at the application. I mean, we're not, certainly this can help paralyze a patient. You know, you're sitting on a wheelchair and you can control your environment. You cannot eat. You can control a robotic arm to, you know, eat your rice and some dish and have a cup of soup. You can do lots of things for people paralyzed, but also it can help a patient, for example, for stroke patient, and you can help the rehabilitation. And also for person that who lost the communication capability, you can type the keyboard sending email or WeChat, or you can just communicate without, and if you cannot, for example, speak, and you will able to do these things. So there are various aspects of application. And I want to more get into scientific technical aspect of brain-computer interface. So the one thing is there are two kinds of brain-computer interface. You can either record invasive signal or record non-invasive signal, or even you record signal over the brain surface, which is a minimally invasive, although still is invasive. And regardless, you can record, even you can record the non-electric signal, although the electric signal is very popular because it represents direct neural activation and also it's easy to handle. Now, among the non-invasive and signal acquisition, I would think that the most popular approach may be represented by these three. One is something called P300, evoked potential, and another is a steady state and the visual evoked potential. So both of them actually is ERP, or evoked potential. And there's another approach that we call sensory motorism. Essentially is if you are doing motor imagination, and then there will be a sensory motorism activity generated in the sensory motor cortex. So our groups work mainly focusing on sensory motorism and the brain-computer interface. So I'm going to focus on this work and in the next. This illustrate is one very simple illustration about how you can develop and apply a sensory motorism BCI. In this case, if you're imagining moving the left hand, they will be generating activity in their sensory motor cortex and while you're imagining. If you're imagining right hand, the same thing in the contralateral, this is some very strong activity can be observed. If you're imagining moving both hands, you will see two activity in over your cortex. So my group first look into this problem by trying to understand better the neurophysiology. Because if you're doing the motor imagination in normal human subject, we cannot put an electrode to directly record. So what did we do is we designed an experiment by doing functional MRI and EEG imaging in the same subject group. with a certain designed task. In this particular case, I would like to show you that you see this is, first of all, is a functional MRI in the subject when you are moving your hand. It's not imagining moving your hand. So in this case, you are moving your left hand, and this activity region of interest is on the right hemisphere. So you can see that there's a huge bold fMRI elevation in the contralateral hemisphere if you are moving the left hand. On the other hand, if you're moving right hand, then you can see that in the left hemisphere, there's a huge bold fMRI elevation. Now, the same subject, now we ask a subject, say, don't move your hand, but you're imagining moving your left hand, we see also the right hemisphere bold fMRI elevation. If the subject is imagining moving the right hand, similar phenomena and occur on the contralateral side, while the other signals are relatively small. So in a group of 13 human subjects, we look at all of them, we ask a subject to move their, in this case, move the right hand. You can see left hemisphere, there's functional MRI activation. And if you're imagining moving the right hand but not actually move, here is also the activation in the left hemisphere, but with much more focal extent. If you look at the beta or alpha EEG, similar co-localization can be obtained, although not as focal as a bold fMRI signal, as what we discussed this sometime earlier in today's presentation. So in this case, we look at, actually we found co-localization in all three phenomena. If we imagining moving right hand, imagining moving left hand, or imagining moving your foot. And there's a co-localization between fMRI imaging and with the EEG imaging, which just suggests a neuroscience basis why we could detect the intention of motor imagination and use that to control a device. So this is maybe a little bit more basic, but this is neuroscience work. Another thing I want to mention that we talk about the paralyzed patient, and it's important to help people who are paralyzed. On the other hand, the BCI may have a lot of application for the healthy population. For example, and it could be used to play video game, or could help cognitive training, or could be used to control Internet of Things, and you can control a device throughout, distribute over the internet. And certainly it could be used to help these manufacturing line workers to assist them, even grocery store and the staff, or even maybe construction. So there are many, many of these applications. And here actually illustrate one of my former students, Chris Coogan, did a virtual reality and programming, and he created this virtual reality background. Actually, we found that it's interesting for a person to play the BCI type of the game type of activity in a virtual and a reality to help people feel that are more excited and more relaxed instead of something that you feel that you have the very tedious work and get bored. So the next I want to show you and two important development in the field. And one is the EEG control the flight of a drone. This video was taken, actually now, while time flies, it's been back 7 years ago. So when I was still in University of Minnesota, and here this is a subject wearing an EEG cap. All he was doing is just by imagining moving his left hand, right hand, or both hand, or nothing. So we put a constant velocity in this drone. This drone is going to fly forward all the time, but the subject controls the drone by imagining moving the left hand to turn left, imagining moving right hand to turn right, both hands to lift up, imagining none of them to bring it down. So in this way, you can basically and enjoy this entire space for, oops. for this, because if you want to go to the back, you can turn left, 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 or right, right, right. Just like you are driving, you don't back off, but you can turn surrounding the street. So this is, and there's a Wi-Fi between this computer and this drone. It's now looking back, it's 7 years back. So it's quite popular now, and lots of groups reproduce this work. But at that time, I still recall that the first subject was very fearful, that because there's a worry that the drone may hurt a human subject. After all this work, and nowadays we know that the BCI can be easily implemented. So another work we've been doing is we're moving this forward, try to help disabled patient. So this is instead of we don't want to have an artificial limb into the patient yet. We want to say, okay, what about if we can control this robotic arm? So this work is representing that how the similar BCI technique can be used. What this subject is doing is just imagining moving her hand to grab this Lego, and then move this Lego and onto one position of this shelf at her choice. Okay, so this is the one trial. And then essentially we have, in total, we have studied 8 human subjects for identical protocol and for over 2,000 trials. On average, there are 80% accuracy, and if you just want to grab the Lego. And on average, there's 70% and accuracy if you grab and also put this Lego onto the shelf. So the entire process. So this is one of the work that was done a few years ago. Now, what we have done recently is we've been developing let me show this video first. We've been developing technique to try to control this robotic arm in a continuous mode, because previously we always have to start from one location, go to next location, but we cannot do continuous recording or control. So this work demonstrates that we are able to actually to control this robotic arm to track a randomly moving cursor on a computer screen. And this is one of the technical development which was made possible through a technique. I want to mention, first of all, that in the previous work, all we need is 10 electrodes. Using 10 electrodes, we can fly a drone. We can control a robotic arm for discrete action. But in this work, we use a 128 electrode recording of the EEG signal. Here describes a summary of the study design. Because in the machine learning approach, we also took the MRI of this subject. We built a subject-specific model. This is using this dynamic EEG-based dynamic brain imaging that I talked about earlier on my talk today. And we implemented that approach into a real-time and source imaging approach. And then we provide that information for the classification and to decode the human intention, say either what you want to do, because it's a continuous signal. And because of this machine learning imaging approach, we were able to make this entire experiment work. And let's look at this and the video again. This is illustrate, because of the continuous control, we need to use more electrode. We're still developing new technique to reduce the number of the electrode, but that is one of the development is by integrating source imaging with the BCI, we were able to, like invasive BCI, you can do continuous control. And the invasive BCI already demonstrate a continuous robotic arm control very, very nicely. And but here we demonstrate for the first time that this is doable from non-invasive EEG as well. So move forward, and as I mentioned, the brain-computer interface has two approach and two aspects. One is brain, one is computer or the machine. And a lot of the approach in the BCI, including some of the work I just introduced today, is to develop a machine learning approach and to read how the human subject intention and control a drone, a robotic arm, and so on. The next couple of minutes, I would like to introduce some of our experimental finding that is highly related to a lot of population now is doing the meditation, okay, in this particular case. So a lot of people are doing the meditation or yoga, try to improve the health. But actually we found that the meditation yoga actually can improve a subject's capability to control a computer cursor or control a robotic arm. The reason we started this work is because we have been studying in our lab many subjects. For some reason, the best subject are those subjects who had experience of yoga or meditation. So we asked a question whether meditation or yoga would play a role. So we did two studies. The first study is looking into long-term meditation. So we recruit 12 subjects who had at least a 1 year experience. And every week they do meditation or yoga for 1 to 2 times and 1 year or more. And another 24 control who never or maximum in their life only had no more than 2 sessions of yoga or meditation. And then we ask them to do same very simple task, to control the cursor to left or right or up or down. And then they start with 100% for both groups. And then you can see that after a certain process, and 2/3 of the yoga meditation group still are able to perform all the tasks being instructed, but only 1/3 of control group are able to do it. Here is, you can see that is more clearly. This is, say, when the time goes by, their meditation group is still stay there. And these are subjects, some of them just go out. So a lot of them being terminated. This is for left or right, and this is for left or right plus their up and down. So you can see the number of subjects who can perform all their tasks is significant for the meditation group, and they pass a significant portion for left or right, and for their entire one-dimensional it's almost double than their control group. The second study we did, and which just was completed, is in a group of 76 subjects, and we split them into 2 groups. Then all of them did not have a meditation yoga experience. So we randomly selected them, and we sent about half of them to a 8 weeks meditation class. The other half is just doing nothing but wait in the waiting list. After 8 weeks, they all come back for a several weeks BCI training. And then we compare the performance between these 2. And here is what you can see is, if this is the number of the session, because we look at in total, we have 10 BCI sessions. And here we normalize at the baseline session. And this is the BCI, the performance, the accuracy, this shows the learning curve for the meditation class. This is for the control class. Both class subjects can learn, but you can see that the meditation class outperform their control group. And there is a very clear and difference or improvement in the performance between their meditation group versus the control group. In particular, and we observe the statistically significant difference in the up-down control and in the overall, the two-dimensional control. So this data show that while if we want to bring the brain-computer interface to everyday life, we need to have a better technology. We certainly need to have better sensor we need to have a better machine learning algorithm, but we also need to perform neuroscience research to understand better the brain. For example, the training process and how we get the brain involved in this adaptation, this process could be equally important than developing a machine learning algorithm that will adapt to the human learning in the process itself. So in summary, I touch on 3 topics today. Everything is, the EEG is involved with that. The first of all, we discuss EEG source imaging that enabled dynamic brain mapping and imaging with high spatial temporal resolution. The one thing I would just want to say that we did not change anything about the EEG electro recording in this work. We use a conventional EEG electrode. So we use conventional hardware. What is innovation is a machine learning algorithm development. That is the same amount of data for this classic data collection modality that we are able to obtain much better results. The second work is about EEG-based brain-computer interface. Now, once again, and in our work, certainly there's a lot of attempts in the field. And we also use a conventional EEG electrode. We did not change the data collection process. The innovation mainly is in the machine learning and the study to study how we can decode the neural signal that otherwise cannot be decoded, which including a lot of these details, of course, but we demonstrate that we can bring the non-invasive BCI from the simple cursor movement control to a actual real-time robotic or drone control in real time using non-invasive signals. The last point is about the meditation improving BCI skill, which indicating the importance of neuroscience research and in addition to machine learning research. So I want to mention that I'm speaking here presenting the work from my group, but I want to mention that all these work are actually collective contribution, particularly by my postdoc, by my student, my former postdoc, former student who are listed on the left column here. And it is their work that I'm presenting here today. I'm very proud to be associated by a group of outstanding young men and young women. On the left side, I want to acknowledge my faculty collaborators, particularly the epilepsy work with Dr. Greg Worrell at Mayo Clinic and Rochester, and some other work, including these Mary Jo, Steve, and Sheng Peng, and Fabio for the work involved with these various neuroscience experimentation. And finally, of course, the work was supported heavily by US government, essentially from the National Institute of Health, and for which we are greatly appreciate. And since I'm taking this opportunity, I want to show you where my building in Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh is. So this is the Biomedical Engineering Department. Actually, this is my office, and in this particular location, so for the Carnegie Mellon Biomedical Engineering, we have a PhD program, and we have actually 4 master programs, including research option, practicum option, and applied study, which involving heavily a off-campus industry hospital internship. And another is in collaboration with the computer science school, is a master degree in biomedical engineering, but with a concentrated study in computer science. And finally, if any of you would have a chance to go through Pittsburgh, please come visit us. And Pittsburgh is beautiful, so as the CMU campus. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Wonderful talk. So, Bing, I have a question. So, this I think you know, brain. Okay, good. So Alice, you have, okay, let me see the question more closely. So I think there are a bunch of questions for you, Bin. The first question is from Yao Pan from the Chinese Academy of Science, and he's a big fan of your research. And mind controlling of the drum is exciting, but I think it's not direct control. It is indirect control via imaging hands. So my question is, can it be directly controlled by mind? For example, if I want the drum to slow down, it can slow down. If I want the drum to turn left, it can turn left. So, yeah. Professor.
Sure, thank you, Tony. And thank you, Dr. Pan. This is an outstanding question. This represents one of the challenge currently in brain-computer interface. That is, so while we are all very fascinated about what BCI can do, we also need to understand BCI cannot do everything, at least yet. So we are not there yet, but I do want to share with you the positive notion. For example, you were saying that initially, and you want to fly this drone towards the left side. Instead of imagining moving the left hand, you're right, in the early days, the subject actually, they will and they have to do that. But later on, I recall that in one of the reporter interview of the subject, actually the same subject you saw, and the subject said that after many, many sessions, and then he turned to learn a skill. So it's true that originally he's consciously he was trying to imagining moving the left hand to moving this drone to the left or robotic arm to the left. But after many training, it become something like he would think about immediately. Once he want to move the robotic arm to the left, and that's how he would initiate that mode imagination. So in this way that you already using this protocol, that even though there is such kind of, this is another example is if we will learn how to drive a car. In the very beginning, there's lots of instruction from the instructor. You have to do this, you have to do that. But after certain experience, you probably are going to drive a car just like what you want to accomplish. You'll get to there instead of particularly thinking about a intermediate steps that maybe you learned from the driving school. So this is one point. The second point is that this motor imagination based approach, compared with some other approach, it has pros and cons. The reason my group is focusing on it is really, I like it, the positive side is it's subject driven, in the sense that I don't need a computer designed a preset pattern. For example, P300, it's being presented to me, and I just looking at some other pattern, it's a machine control. In this case, I can control by my own brain. But on the other hand, the limitation is certainly there's a lot of technical challenge. We're still working on it. So that is where we are, where there's a positive notion, but it does not solve all the problem yet. It's a great question. Thank you.
Fantastic. So the second question is, there are 100 billions of neurons. We can certainly not able to generate 100 billion electrodes. So how many electrodes are needed ideally to decode the neural activity? In other words, how many neurons are involved in coding a byte of information in the brain?
This is an excellent question again. And before I address this question, let me use another example. We probably all would know functional MRI would be the most powerful neuroimaging modality these days. And with the very popular 3 Tesla MRI machine everywhere in the world, most country, that the spatial resolution, what we can get is a millimeter, okay? Using 3 Tesla machine, using functional MRI, you can pinpoint at a millimeter spatial resolution. So you can say, okay, this millimeter brain region versus that millimeter brain region. That's very, very precise, much better than EEG. The question is, how many neurons within a millimeter cube brain region? Many. There are many, many neurons there. So first of all, what I use as an example is I want to say there is no single device, single technology in this world now, very likely many years to come, that is going to allow us to image single neuron activity non-invasively. If it's invasively, there's many approach, all right? So now let's get to answer this question is using EEG electrode. What is very important is it's a synchronized network activity. So if they are not synchronized, they will be rejected. It will be synchronized, it's a region of activity. Now, how many electrode is needed? That depends on specific application. But what I could share with my experience is it's highly desirable. You need to have 64 electrode if you want to do EEG source imaging. If you could have more, would be better. But whether you need more than 128 electrode, it's unclear. But once again, there is no single relationship about how many neurons and in terms of the byte of information, that the definition is different, right? For example, like in the BCI control, the left, the right, that's 1 byte of information. And that, as what I mentioned, if that's all you want to do, 2 electrodes would be enough. If you just want to do left or right control. Thank you.
Thank you, great answer. So I learned a lot. So another question is it really great? Okay, so the person is asked, can you share some details? How about the training and calibration of the operator?
Excellent question again. As because of time limitation, I didn't get into the detail of that. There is a machine learning. Certainly, we have algorithm, but the training protocol is extremely important. So we developed a very rigorous training protocol in our lab before to accomplish that. We don't know if it's optimal, but that worked. So what we did is we trained subject with a very simple left or right cursor movement first, and then we train subject up and down. Then we train subject in 2-dimensional cursor movement. And after that, actually we have another work, which I didn't have time to explain today, is we developed a virtual helicopter and BCI control before we actually control an actual drone. So we train subject with that virtual helicopter and to learn everything. After all of that, and then we start to train subject on the drone. And there's a bigger variation from subject to subject. The subject you saw in the video, actually, I mean, by the way, I mean, he was my former PhD student and now is a postdoc in Stanford University. And that is the 3rd time in his life to fly a drone that was a videotaped and was shared. So some people can learn quite quick, but you have to go through this serious training protocol before you accomplish that. Thank you.
Thank you. So next question is, so both signals are more from capillary vessels. Are there any correlation between neuronal activities and major arteries, for example, middle cerebral artery?
Very good question. And by the way, I recall I did not present any neurovascular coupling work in this presentation, but this question is about what would be the biophysical or neuroscience correlation between because the bold is a functional MRI signal, and EEG is the electrical signal generated by the neuronal and activation. There are a number of work, particularly I believe a seminal work is by the German group Loctesis and his group. And what did they do is in monkey, and they insert electrode into the visual cortex of the monkey, and then they record both the bold and the electrophysiological signal simultaneously. They reported a strong correlation between the bold functional MRI signal with electrophysiological signal. That actually triggered a lot of work on neurovascular coupling. So, but once again, there is a lots of challenge as well in that work, although I'm not actually working on it. For example, if the vessel is big, how you're going to look into this correlation. But there's a lot of scientists are still working on this problem, to my knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So next question is, Professor He, now you can use brain-machine interface to control the machine accurately. Is there any feedback process to realize the closed loop interaction?
Great question. And as what I mentioned that in one of the slides of this new chapter on BCI that's going to come out in a month or two, the BCI, in my understanding, and what I showed today, a lot of example is a brain control. So we record, we decode the human intention from EEG signal. We turn that into control signal. We control either computer cursor, a robotic arm, or fly a drone. So this is one way. As this question asked, and what about to use feedback to really have a closed loop? And another way is the neuromodulation approach. We can encode information inside our brain by injecting physical energy. There has been study reported that some scientists that put multiple subjects together, and then on the one hand, that they derived information as I shown today, and so they tell another subject, and that subject then control, and then the way they tell that subject is by applying a neuromodulation technology called TMS, or transcranial magnetic stimulation, by injecting magnetic signal. And you stimulate the other person's subject, so that you communicate that information, and then that subject can certainly do something more. To my knowledge, I think little has been reported as of today, although some lab, including my own lab, we are also looking at to try to connect this loop using both brain control or neuromodulation, everything in a closed loop. But I think relatively there's a little literature at this time, but this would be a very good direction to going forward as a research. Thank you.
Okay, great. So, because of we have limited time, we only can take 5 questions. So this is Professor, really wonderful talk. I learned a lot. I'm sure the audience also learned a lot. I want to thank you for joining us and deliver such a wonderful talk. So on the screen is a certificate that I presented to you, and with your name and the title of your talk. And iCANX later on is going to mail a hard copy of the certificate to you, and we really want to appreciate. I just want to express our appreciation for spending time with us and delivering such a wonderful talk. Yeah, thank you. I
want to thank all the audience for your interest and for your time. And thank you, Tony, for moderating.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.